My name is Michelle Shepherd. Like Tanya, I work at the Toronto Star, and I could not be more honored to be able to do this tonight. And for those of you who don't know, I thought I should tell you that we have actually known each other and been very close friends since 1995, when we shared a desk as interns, summer interns at the Star. So I'll tell you this for two reasons. We basically talk about 15 times a day. We almost wore the same shirt tonight. So we might just be chatting and kind of forget that you're all there. So if you want to, give a shout out, remind me. The other reason is I'm completely biased. I'm so proud of her. I watched this book and all the come to fruition and all the work that she put into it, know how hard it was getting there. So, yeah, I'm completely biased. So, Tanya, we drove here tonight together too. She might help with some of the questions.
It's true, we might finish each other's sentences too, which we're already doing.
We're going to try not to do that tonight. I did want to start it on a sad note of what everybody's talking about today, Gord Downey's death. And it's so interesting how he, in so many ways, put this issue out there. Tell me a little bit about him. You met him, and then how it was him in a way that did drive us forward, or what you think about that.
Thank you, Michelle. And thank you for persevering. Michelle is very sick tonight too, and she's had a few cold medicine, but I think
it's water here.
It's water there. I started my day today in Kingston. I was at Queen's University last night. I was asked to address the community there, and it was a really lovely night. And then this morning, got up, went to the train station, walked in the Kingston train station, and there was a News World flash about Gord dying, and I think I told you, I just kind of let this massive no out, like standing in the middle of the train station. It's pretty upsetting. I didn't know him very well. I met him a couple times. The last time I saw him was the beginning of the Secret Path tour. I was lucky enough to be there with Chani Wenjack's family and Anishinaabe Aski Nation, which I will be talking about as we go. But just so you know, Anishinaabe Aski Nation, for those who haven't read the book, is a political organization of 49 First Nations in Northern Ontario, roughly about the size of France. So it's an area that goes from Thunder Bay to James Bay to Hudson Bay over to the Manitoba border. It's a massive territory. And 45,000 people live there. And Chani Wenjack was from Agoki Post, which is Martin Falls First Nation. And I've gotten to know Pearl Wenjack and Daisy. Both Pearl and Daisy are sisters of Chani's. And they went to residential school with him. And I was at the Secret Path concert in Ottawa. It was the very first night that it happened, and I was doing this thing because I was writing about Chani for my book, and I knew that he had done this wonderful multimedia, the poems, the book, the music, and so I didn't listen, I didn't look, I didn't do any of that until I just got there and I sat in the audience, and I was just totally blown away by his music and by the story. Then we went backstage, and I remember standing there, and he got off the stage, and I was with Alvin Fiddler, who's the Grand Chief, and we're just standing there, and I felt like such a fangirl too, it's like, oh my God. And like so many of us, right? I mean, of a certain age, we all went to university listening to the Tragically Hip, New Orleans is thinking, like all that, definitely. So then he walks in backstage, and he just sort of saunters, right? And he had his hat on, and he was just like beautiful in his denim jacket and everything. And he came over and he said hello to a few people, and he came over and he kissed me on the lips. And gave me a big hug, and I was like, oh my God.
But then you realized he did to everybody.
Yeah, he did. It wasn't just me.
I
know. I see, this is where the friend comes in. Stop, it was just me. Anyway,
I was so jealous.
Yeah, it was amazing. So his family was there, and yeah, we actually talked about the book I was doing. He knew I was doing this, and yeah, we shared some shared a few words, actually a lot, and yeah, so I'm thinking about him tonight quite a bit actually, and all day I've just felt just like, oh my God, you know, he's just been creating so much wonderful things. And you mentioned to me, you know, what was it that about him that sort of brought this to the forefront? You know, I think I come from a different perspective from a lot of people. My great-grandmother was a residential school survivor. She raised my mother. So I always thought everybody else knew about residential schools. I didn't know, really, that Canadians had no idea. For the most part, like, people are getting to know now, but they didn't before. And when Gord mentioned it at the concert, it just reached Canadians that wouldn't perhaps possibly be thinking about residential schools. They wouldn't have been thinking about those issues. So I think that's how that concert was in August that it happened. That was his farewell, tragically, to concert.
But it's kind of stunning. I mean, even as we're saying at the beginning now that we have these readings in schools, all this stuff has sort of come suddenly. And I remember, not for you, because I remember this has always been on your radar, but watching you at the Star, we still sit together 20 years later, but watching you at the Star try to get these stories in the paper. And this would be going back, let's say, you know, 2010, 2011, and we'll talk about the story in 2011 in a moment. But, you know, not is this being live Facebook or anything? Because I'm just going to trash our editors now. But, not to, it wouldn't just be the Star. But why was it so difficult to get these stories in the paper? That's changed now. But why has it changed now? Like, what was the challenge back then?
And you know about all those challenges too, right? That's the thing. So I would always say, can you believe they just didn't want the story again? Anyway.
And it's a chicken and the egg. I mean, sometimes we always blame the paper, but often it's what the public wants too. You know, they drive each other.
That's true. That's true.
So we can put them both in there, right?
Yeah, it's true. There wasn't the appetite. Oftentimes our editors, they were good. Sometimes when I come up with the story idea, saying, look, I want to write about the North, and this is what I want to do. And then other times there was just like, there was no interest. And definitely it was more like, this is before though. This is, I'm going to take it back even further to like when I started the Star, I started in 95, we both did. And I remember writing a couple of stories, and it was all I could do to get one story in the paper. And oftentimes editors are saying, well, what's different about the story? You know, they thought I would be writing about chiefs that were taking money from people on the First Nation. It was like, you know, the Dirty Chief, or the stories of also murdered Indigenous people. They would say, well, what's new? It's the same old story. And there was that pervasive attitude that ran throughout newsrooms, but it also ran throughout Canadian society. I've always thought there's been a quiet racism that just runs through Canadian society, and if you sort of scratch the surface, you'll find it. And it was there for a long time, for so many years. I mean, it was blatantly there with the residential school experience, the 60s scoop. I mean, a lot of Indigenous people too didn't talk about their history. A lot of them weren't proud, and the history is also very complicated for a lot of people, and a lot of hardship. Sort of, you go through a lot sometimes. So getting people interested in the stories was difficult until about I'm going to say the I Don't Know More movement, because I really do believe that social media and the growth of social media with Indigenous people, especially spread out across Canada, has made a really huge difference. The youth has really made a massive difference, and they are going to continue to, because everyone lives in remote places, and you know, everyone communicates. I communicate with everybody by Facebook Messenger, everybody. It's just like everyone's on all the time, and we're all messaging each other. But you're from far-flung areas, and this is the one way we can talk to each other. And as you know, I keep saying, okay, I sound like I'm 2,000 years old, but I'm truly not. But as the youth that were coming up, it's just that's their mode of communication, and they were driving things on social media and Twitter too. I mean, like, there's a presence now of Indigenous people, and it's remarkable. And it's like, hey, no, actually, we're still here, and we're going forward with these stories. And and they call people out. That's true. That's not true. You know, how can you say that? And before that just wasn't happening at all.
And you had a powerful story about Jordan in 2011. Tell me about how that sort of was in some ways the genesis of all
That's
of this.
right. Yeah, it's actually saying all that. I should also say too, so sorry, then I'll go back, I'll circle back, that one of the other things...
Okay, you wrote these questions, so maybe
I actually did, she's not
she didn't.
I'm just going to circle back and also say for a minute that after, not just I Don't Know More, but TRC, when that became sort of front page news all over Canada, and everyone started to realize about how many residential schools there were, how many people had been affected, and you could see the links of intergenerational trauma. Everyone started to get like, okay, became just far more aware. CBC Indigenous started out, which was huge actually. You know, they have the power of a taxpayer-funded broadcaster, and they could put reporters everywhere, and all of a sudden that was huge for Indigenous journalism. So was APTN. And so that's part of the reason why everybody started to hear more and to care more, and that was around the time of I Don't Know More and everything else was coming into fruition. Okay, and
I was just asking about Jordan.
Okay, yeah,
2011.
Yeah. So what happened with that one was I was a national reporter at the time, worked at Queen's Park, and the federal election was going on, and Stephen Harper was duking it out with Jack Layton. And I thought to myself, you know, I'd really like to write an article on the election, the federal election, and I was pretty new to political reporting, even though I'd been at the paper for a long time, and so I pitched an article to my editors on why is it Indigenous people don't vote. And, you know, I knew the reasons why, but I just wanted to sort of write an explainer for everyone else. And so my editor said, yeah, sure, going up to Thunder Bay, because I asked to go to Thunder Bay so I could interview Stan Verity. And Stan Verity at the time was the NAN Grand Chief, and remember NAN, 49 First Nations, yeah, besides France. So I went to Thunder Bay to sit and talk with Stan, and it was a really interesting interview because it was pretty frustrating. I got there and I asked Dan, why is it, started the easy question, why isn't it First Nations people are not voting? And then he looked at me and he said, why aren't you writing a story about Jordan Lavas? And then I'm like, okay, maybe he didn't hear me. Let's try this again. And I said, if First Nations voted in blocks, I'm sure you could swing part of the election in certain ridings. And has anyone ever thought about that? And then he looked at me and he said, Jordan's been missing for 70 days. I asked one more question, and he looked at me again, and he said, we think we've seen tracks down by the water. We think that's where Jordan went in. And at that point, I realized that I was not going to get my questions answered whatsoever.
Not the story you came to.
No, it was not the story. And as we both know, that's kind of brutal, right? You pitch a story, especially at a newspaper. It doesn't have they're always concerned about budget. You're saying, I've got to do this story, so I'm going to go get this story. So I go up there, and it was clear to me that I was not going to get the story that I came for. And so I just sort of thought, okay, stop and just remember who you are, where you are, and who you're talking to. He's clearly trying to tell you something. It's time for you to open your ears and time to listen to what he's saying. And I did, and he said to me, the next thing he said was, Jordan is the 7th student to die or go missing while at school in Thunder Bay since 2000. And then when he said that, it was like a light went off. My ears opened, and I finally heard what he was telling me. There's more into the story. He said to me, I know, I'm bothered now.
I'm not criticizing you. You sound like a terrible friend.
So Stan said, okay, then he ran through the 7's names, and he said, let's go on a drive. So then I said, okay. So then we hopped into his pickup truck, and Stan put a gospel CD into the CD player. And we're driving, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm like sitting here, we're driving in this pickup truck down to Thunder Bay, and we're listening to all this music about God. And then I asked him, so why are we listening to this, Stan? We kind of had a good relationship, and I could say something like, Stan, come on, what's up with the gospel? And then he said to me, well, when I listen to this, I think about my son Daniel. And he said that Daniel died when he was 19, and then he told me the story of his son, his only son. who was living with them, and he was going to high school at Dennis Franklin, Cromarty, and he was beaten to within an inch of his life at a house party at Fort William First Nation, and he later died in hospital 2 days later.
Did you know that before he told that story?
No, not before. And so it became like it started, sinking into me, okay, we're talking here about 7 students that have died. Now he's telling me about his son that has died. And so it was clear to me what Stan was saying. It's like, Tanya, pay attention to what I'm saying. This is very important. And so then we drove to the Kaministiquia River, and Thunder Bay, if you don't know it at all, it's surrounded by water. Lake Superior is the monster. It's so huge, and the whole area sort of bends to its weather patterns. It's beautiful, it's ferocious, and it's wicked. So all these streams and rivers flow into Lake Superior, and also in the center of Thunder Bay is Fort William First Nation. So you can't help but seeing it. It's this big mountain cay sort of right in the middle. So we're driving and we get to the Kaministiquia riverbank, and the grain elevators are there. There are 8 functioning massive grain elevators still in Thunder Bay on the water. And we got out, and I sort of felt sick to my stomach because I knew exactly where we were, and I looked up and I saw Fort William and Mount McKay, and that's my grandmother's reserve. So I've been up there with my kids. They've been running through the grass, and you can go up to the top of Mount McKay and you get a really nice, beautiful view of Thunder Bay. And I just felt sick, and he said to me, "This is where we think Jordan was last seen."
Did you know right then that you needed to do a book? I mean, or what was your thought process once you left there?
I knew it wasn't going to be just stories for the newspaper. I knew that the newspapers, I didn't know what I was going to find and where we were going to go with it, but I just felt like this was just something more. Like it was a feeling like deep within inside me that this is different, and not only that, I was just feeling more of very connected to what was happening because of my mom and my grandmother. And so, and just another aside to that story, after the water, and he showed me where the tracks were, he took me we got back in the car, and he dropped me off at Dennis Franklin Cromarty High School, and that's where 6 of the 7 students went to school. It's a First Nations run high school in Thunder Bay. And he just sort of pounded on the door. We marched in there, and he dropped me off at the principal's office and said, "This is Tanya." her grandma's Anish let her in. And so that was it. And I stayed at the school all day. I went to Jordan's, the command center, the search for him. And I saw all the people that were there. Like when somebody goes missing from the north, everybody comes down from all the different First Nations. Everyone helps, everyone looks. It was remarkable. And then I was feeling really, okay, all right, this is something. This is something I gotta follow.
One of the things I liked most about your book is it's this intimate portrayal of these students and their families and the tragedy and the failures. But throughout, you also remind people of the history, and that everything that you found up there is related. So when we talk about residential schools, we talk about generational trauma. Explain a little bit, because I remember when you were going through that, you were saying that you were discovering that it all is related. Can you talk a little bit about that?
That's a big question.
Sorry, that is a big question.
Did I write that one?
Sorry?
Did I write that one?
You didn't write that one, sorry. I read that one. I'm not looking now. Don't know where this is going to go.
Okay, yeah. Actually, I'm going to go back to a little bit about what I was saying earlier, that I sort of had a different perspective, and I thought like a lot of people knew more about the history than everybody else did. And I think that was also apparent when I wrote the first part of the book, and I remember I was so proud. I thought I had the first draft in, and I remember giving it to my beautiful, amazing, awesome editor, Jeannie, who's standing right over there. And she just went.
She had other words for you at that time.
She's like, no, it came back to me. And then we really worked through the process, because again, I was thinking, well, everyone knows this. Nobody knows any of this. this. And she goes, you have to write it this way. You have to explain everything. And again, being newspaper reporters like I was used to, you've written 2 books. This was written 2 books. Like I'd not written that way before. And she's like, get expensive. Just write. And explain everything.
Different style, yeah.
It's a totally different style. And she's, she was fantastic. She's like, I don't know anything. I'm from Scarborough. I don't know. Just write it down. And so that's what, and it was, but very much through our discussions and through Janie's suggestion, she goes, you have to write this overarching narrative of colonial history and what's happening now. And then the history of Thunder Bay, and then it's the story of the kids. And so there are 3 overarching narratives, and that's what we came to. But that was her saying.
Well, it worked, both of you.
Yeah.
You raised Thunder Bay. Obviously, that's the backdrop for this. What's wrong with Thunder Bay? I told her I was going to ask it a different way, but I asked exactly how I said I was going to. And not to trash the city, but there's just such a fundamental rot that comes through in this, in how these cases were handled, and they're a real sort of deep-seated racism. Is that unique to a city, or is it, what makes that have happened there, and is it happening elsewhere?
It's not a big question. It's a very hard one, I know Thunder Bay comes across as really negative, and lots has happened, and I can explain a lot about it, but I very much love Thunder Bay. I love that area. I feel very connected to the north and that specific area. And Thunder Bay has had so much happen to it. Over hundreds of years. The history of Thunder Bay is very rich and very deep, and it goes back thousands of years, actually. The Ojibwe, they met there forever. Like, the rivers all come in. They meet on the shore as well. They traded there. The fur trading happened there. The opening up of Canada, the grain elevators that I talked about, that all happened there. And also, too, it's sort of the main city, Thunder Bay. You got, in Dryden and Sioux Lookout, which are not... They don't have very much of the social services at all. Sioux Lookout's getting better with the hospital, but it's, if you need something and you're Indigenous, you come into Thunder Bay. So you fly into the city for healthcare, you fly in for specialist appointments, you fly in for social services, you fly in to look for a job. And so Thunder Bay, too, in saying in its defense, it hasn't had the infrastructure to handle everything. So you've got this sort of push and pull, yin and yang happening there. You also have a residential school that was there for a long time, and that hasn't really been talked a lot about in Thunder Bay and its history, but it's very much a part of what Thunder Bay is. And also, too, everyone knew, I know my mother always used to talk about, her family would talk about how there were 2 different hospitals in Thunder Bay. There was a hospital for the white people, and there was a hospital for the Indians, right? So, and if you got tuberculosis, you were over here in this hospital, and my uncle was there, my great uncle was, when you're in there, you don't come out. You're in there for a very long time. It was divided, and to me, I always knew 2 sides of Thunder Bay. Thunder Bay is actually an interesting spot, too, because it's an amalgamated city. It's Port Arthur and it's Fort William. But I always knew Fort William, and Port Arthur, I also sort of go on about this in the book, is kind of like the prosperous, the city, the area of business. The houses are middle class. That's where the people of business live. And then you've got sort of the Fort William side, which is a little bit different. It's like, and not to bring Scarborough up again. I was born in Scarborough, so I can say this, but it was, it looks more like Scarborough. The urban planning isn't that great. There's strip malls, Arthur Street's like Ellesmere, just goes on, and there's nothing but fast food, Safeways.
What's going on in Thunder Bay now? Because it's in the news a lot.
Yeah, so what happened was, with the story of the 7, an inquest was held into their deaths. And you know how I was talking about earlier, too, about how people come down for services? Well, the 7 kids were all in Thunder Bay because they had no high school to go to in their home communities. And this was also like a major motivator reason, actually, what kept on hitting me over the head when you asked me earlier, why did you feel like you had to write this book, and did you know it was going to be a book? That was definitely one of it. I'm just I just couldn't believe, how is it possible that these kids at 14 years old have to travel 400, 500, 600 kilometers by themselves and live in a boarding home and go to high school in a foreign city? And you have to remember too that these kids are coming from, a lot of them come from homes that there's not a lot of money, there's not a lot of employment on the reserves, there's not fresh water, they don't have traffic lights, they don't have, Northern Store is basically the only store there. I mean, they don't have fast food or malls or theaters. There's nothing like that. And a lot of the kids, they don't speak English, right? They come into Thunder Bay, and English is not their first language. So that's why they were there, and that's why the 7 kids were in Thunder Bay, because they were going there for high school. And one of the things I still cannot believe is it should be a human right of any Canadian, Indigenous or not, to be able to have a high school education, and a good one.
Writing any book is difficult, and I know you wrote this one fairly quickly, but talk about what it was like for you looking into your own past with your grandma and your mom, and you're writing about kids, and you have kids that age. And this is an unfair question, because I know we did talk a lot about this, and I worried about you because it's a really emotional book to write, but then when you're sort of exploring your own history, it's really emotional. How did you deal with that? And did it help, or did it make it harder?
I think it helps for sure. Writing about children, teens. I call them children a lot because I have my son is almost 16, my daughter's 14. They're children. And I can't imagine sending one of them away 500 kilometers to go to school. I mean, I'm ecstatic if my son can make like craft dinner, right? So I don't...
We're proud of your daughter getting to high school these days.
Yeah, we're proud of her that she gets on the bus and goes to high school. Yeah, it's exciting. So I think that really, that helps. I think it helps being a mom and knowing that. So it's like, oh my God, how could you do that? Like, how does that feel? And you have no choice. I mean, your choice is, okay, I could keep my son or my daughter here at home, and we could try distance education, but distance education, it's a really great stopgap. I mean, every kid should have a school where there's a gymnasium and there's a library and a cafeteria and it's like a sports game to go to after. Like that should be every Canadian should have that, Indigenous and non. And so that really just spoke to me, and being a mom really sort of also spoke to me, and also to the so much of what's happened in my family. I could see, when we talk about residential schools, we talk about intergenerational trauma, and I think you'd be incredibly hard-pressed to find an Indigenous family that didn't have somebody go through the residential school system, or to have children adopted out. My sister was adopted out, and I actually didn't meet her until I was 25. And my mother's brothers were in the child welfare system, all 3 of her brothers, and we didn't meet them until they were, oh my goodness, they found us when they opened up the adoption laws. So every family has the same story, every Indigenous family. And so I felt, when I read the story and when I got to know the story of the kids, I'm like, to an extent, I could relate in a different way, I think.
How did you come up with the title, and there's a story behind the art too?
There's a story there. Kyle Morrisseau is he's one of the boys that died. He was from Kiwewin First Nation. And Kiwewin First Nation is, again, it's 600 kilometers northwest of Thunder Bay. And Christian, Kyle's father, painted this. And it is an absolutely gorgeous mural. It is the size of I didn't know how else to describe it, so I badly used the king-size bed. That's basically the size of the canvas. Christian is Norvell Morrisseau's son. So Kyle is his grandson. Kyle was also a painter. Kyle was 15 years old when he died, and Kyle and Christian had an art show in Ottawa, actually, and the day that they had an art show there, Kyle sold more paintings than his father. Yeah, which is really cool. And I got a photo of him holding up his check, like he was so excited. And everyone has always said too that, you know, Kyle really had the gift. When the inquest was over, Christian was hollow. Most of the parents were hollow because nobody got any answers when the inquest was done. It ran for 8 months. 145 recommendations were done, and at the very end of the day, 5 of the students, they were all boys, ended up in the water in the rivers in Thunder Bay, and there was no evidence as to how the boys got in the water whatsoever brought up at the inquest. So that question still remains: how did they get in there? As well, undetermined was the cause of death for 3 of the kids in the water, and also for Paul Panaches, who actually died on his mother's kitchen floor. That's a different story, and I know I'm backing in, I'm giving a long explanation. But 2 of the kids, Robin Harper, the only girl, and Paul Panaches, they died in their boarding houses. And Paul was the only one that had his mom with him, because his mom moved from their reserve Mishkagagamang First Nation to be with Paul, because Paul was older. He was still trying to graduate high school. He was 21, and he had been in 10 different boarding homes all through high school. Nothing was fitting. You know, bad experiences, some were good, but 10 different homes. I mean, how could you settle and do, you know, get your education? One of the homes was so terrible. If he was a minute late to have dinner, they put padlocks on the cupboards, and so they wouldn't feed him any food. So she said, enough's enough. She moved down, and sadly, though, Paul collapsed and died on her kitchen floor. So when the inquest was over, and at the inquest too, just one more thing, she waited 9 years to hear from a medical examiner because nobody called her when her son died. She was not called by a doctor. She was not called by a coroner. They took him away. He went to the hospital, and he was vital signs absent as he died, but no one gave her an explanation ever. So she waited 9 years for the inquest to happen, and then at the inquest she was thinking, okay, I'm finally going to get some sort of explanation, because another coroner was brought in to review all the existing material, and she was told, we have no idea what killed him. 0. So she still has no answer. That's just one example. But anyway, so when the inquest was finished, Christian sat down, and he, of course, was also feeling hollow, and he thought he would feel more, he told me he thought he would feel more of a sense of relief, but he didn't feel anything like that. So he got his paintbrush out, and he created this, and these are the kids, and this is Kyle right here on the far right. Thank you, Laura. He's the tallest one here. And the girl is Robin. She's got yellow on her shoulders, it looks like, and she's got longer hair here. And this is a painting of them going to the afterlife. These are their spirits here, and these little red figures are their elders and their people of their family that are taking them there, waiting for them to take them through, dive into the afterlife. And so Norval Morisseau is up there waiting for his grandson. And honestly, I can't begin to tell you what big of an honor it is for Christian to have agreed to have this on the book. And he also called his painting 7 Fallen Feathers. And that is so incredibly, it is perfect that he would allow us to use that. It makes me also feel good.
So I really wanted to leave time for questions from everyone else. I'm not looking at Twitter, I don't have a watch, so I keep looking down here. I just have 1 or 2 more questions, and then we can open it up. I know we've talked about this, and it's something I've faced as well when you cover a story for a long time, or you do a book. I covered Omar Cotter, and even this most recent kidnapping story I covered for 5 years and got to know the people involved, the parents, really well. How do you, on something that's so intense like this, how did you go about getting to know the families, getting their trust, caring about them, and yet you still had to have a bit of journalistic distance to be able to write this? Appreciating even sometimes writing a book is a bit different than journalism, like there's these fine lines we kind of walk, but did you struggle with that, or how did you?
I did, yeah. I think we talked about that quite a bit too. It was hard. It's different writing a book for sure, and getting to know people. And I have to say that I'm just the families are awesome. They're so resilient, and I'm so honored and proud of them, because if they didn't stand up and tell their stories and share the most painful and intimate details of what happened to them, this book wouldn't at all be half of what it is. And I'm so thankful for them, and it shows you how much they love their children. And I think, a lot of people say to me, oh, with the book, it's gripping and everything, but it's so depressing. But this is the one thing that we talked about. We really hope that people would get the sense that these children were loved. They were loved by their families and their friends, and they were loved by their communities. And their lives mattered. They made a difference. And I hope that came through. And so the people I got to know, like Christian, Dora Morris, Jethro Henderson. Jethro was the first boy to die. He just turned 15, and he died in 2000, the year that the school opened, the First Nations school, Dennis Franklin. I love Dora Morris. She's small and she's mighty and she's awesome, and all the kids in the neighborhood congregate in her house. And she was out there in her minivan looking for Jethro every single day for 6 days, until the Thunder Bay police started to look for him. It took 6 days for the police to respond. When she phoned to say, my nephew hasn't come home, and she basically raised him. She was his aunt, but she was more than that. The first police officer she spoke to said, oh, don't worry, he's probably just out there partying like every other Native kid. And the phone hung up. She's like, what do I do now? So she got her husband Tom, and they got into their minivan, and they drove up and down the streets, and she did that for days. And then Jethro's mom came from Casablanca Lake First Nation, and the people from Casablanca all flooded in, and everyone started to look for Jethro, like Indigenous search teams. They were everywhere looking for him. And he was eventually found beginning of November in the water.
And you didn't mention this, but Tanya is donating some of the proceeds to the book to a school, is it that?
Yeah, thanks for mentioning it. I said you kind of mentioned it. Yeah, thank you for saying that. Dennis Franklin Marty's high school, it opened in 2000. A month later is when Jethro went missing and then died. 6 of the kids went there, and so 10% of the sales of the book go to the Dennis Franklin Marty Memorial Fund, and it's a fund that helps the kids with their sports equipment, helps them with just going to school, and also hopefully bursaries if they like to go to college or to university. So yeah, it's a good thing. And did I answer your question, the earlier one about responsibility? No, I did not. I totally evaded it. I worked around it. It's the one thing I did
answer a lot of them.
I know. I don't. I just started talking. Yeah. But I don't know if you found this too, Michelle. Like, do you find that?
Well, Tanya.
But do you find that it's like the responsibility? It's different, though. It's like writing a book is different, though, from writing a news story. News story, two sides, but a book you don't have to necessarily.
There's more of it. It's more like it can be more like a column. But sure, I mean, I think even without the books just being on any beat for a long time, it's really difficult to maintain that sort of old school journalism, right. Inverted pyramid type stories we used to do. We've been covering our various beats for years. I cover terrorism and been to Guantanamo 27 times. I have an opinion about Guantanamo, so it's hard to always get two sides in. So yeah, but I mean, something like this, when you're so close with the families, that's a whole other, it's an emotional level, because you're in some ways exposing, I mean, it's incredible tribute to the kids. It's so beautiful. I mean, those who haven't read it, you're going to be weeping at so many different times. But you're also sometimes exposing some personal stuff that they maybe don't want out, needs to come out. But and that's hard. I mean, I struggle with that. I'm sure you did too.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
And you're having going to be up in Thunder Bay too for a launch there. Do you want to talk about that at all, or just mention it because it's going to? I'm also coming to that, just not to do a Q&A, just to
just fine.
but it's
it's
the families are all going to be there.
Yeah, some of them are going to be there, and we're going to do a ceremony down by the water. And then we're going to the high school, Dennis Franklin, to have a feast. And all the kids are going to come too, all the high school kids that are there. There's about 100 kids there, and students. So, yeah, we just got the bookmarks made. We made some bookmarks up for them, and we're going to take them up to give to everyone, and a big feast. Turkey, yeah, it's great.
I think at this point, we can open it up if you have questions, and yeah, go ahead. So if you couldn't hear the question, she just very sweetly asked, the emotional side, and it's very taxing on what you do to look after yourself.
That's a really nice question. I talked to her.
We go spinning, actually.
Yeah, we go spinning. It's true. We work out. It's not that you need to hear this, but it wasn't actually a joke. We're actually the best of friends for over 20 years, and so this helps. We help each other. She writes about, just got finished writing about the boil, and she's still in it. There's so much stuff that we're doing, and a lot of us look to each other for that. And also, I know it sounds kind of silly, but it's true. We do. And
it helps to have people who go through the same situation.
It does. It really does. And we also decompress together too. Like we do exercise together. I know.
We really do.
We actually do. And it really helps. It helps to do those things. And I shut off. You shut off too. I know that. Like you just shut down and shut off. And sometimes I can't cover things. Like sometimes I just need a break. And the Star's actually been really great for that. And I don't even know if they noticed, but or they probably do notice.
Now they know. Apparently.
Now they know. So it's like sometimes I'm in work a little bit later or whatever, and I work odder hours. But sometimes I just go back and pull back and try not to do too much. And I also do find this, I think too. You just do certain things too. Like sometimes you only focus on certain stories. Like I can't do everything, because if I do, I'll get overwhelmed, and then it's just too much, and then it becomes too emotional and everything else. And so I try and just stick with certain things.
I think that journalism used to be a bit more macho in the sense that you could never show that when we started. And I know when we first started traveling abroad, you see awful things, you would never come back and want to talk about that because they worried you wouldn't be sent on the next trip.
Yeah.
And that's really changed. Really, there's a real appreciation of PTSD and all sorts of things, and there's a support.
Yeah,
and we often think about foreign trips, but it's actually, this is, as you say, really, really deep on a lot of levels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also too, I have two, my kids keep me pretty grounded. My teenagers I was just talking about, this will just knock me right down,
Yeah, it's just more level-headed.
They'll say, oh, Mom, you're emo again.
Go ahead. The question was, we couldn't hear it. Did you ever get the answer or do the story about why Indigenous people don't vote?
Yeah, I never did the story. So yeah, I just so it was one of those times where I came back and you know what, I'm not doing that. This is what I'm doing.
But why is that? Is there?
Well, the right to vote wasn't given to Indigenous people until 1960. So it's remarkable, so it's like, well, that's your government, that's not my government, right? First Nations they have their own systems, they've got their own councils, and it's like, well, why? That's not part of me. And also too, it's being shut out and disenfranchised from the voting system for such a long period of time. I feel like, you're an outsider to it. But that's changing, I think now, like a lot of people are becoming candidates because there is definitely a feeling that you have to work to change the system, right? So, yeah, you work to change. But yeah, it's true, but there's also been so much, I talk about a lot of trauma and hurt and everything else. It takes, often it's not easy to go through a process.
Other questions? Yes?
Are you Lisa?
Lisa's a high school teacher.
Yeah. Where you were asking about that? Well, yeah.
Can you guys hear? Did you hear that? Or so she's just saying first that it's great as a teacher, and this book has meant so much, and I hope this book gets taught. And was asking about the residence that's being built.
Yeah. Alvin Fiddler is trying to build a residence there, and I know that that's something that he's been talking to the Chani Munjak Fund about, together, to get that done. I believe he's raising money for it now. Last I talked to him, that was just a couple months ago, he was raising money for it, but it's going to take a lot. I believe, though, there was an architect in place too, someone who's volunteered time. So
that's in Thunder Bay?
Thunder Bay, yeah, Dennis Franklin and Marty. So hopefully that's still a go. Yeah, that's something else that I could tell you about later, but it's, yeah.
Are there other questions from Val? Yes, go ahead.
That has to be definitely community driven. If the communities want the road, then that's something that should be looked at, but it absolutely has to be something that we don't impose, like from here. I mean, that has to be something that if the communities want the roads, and everyone feels the same way in the area, then they should have that road for sure. Right now, there's the ice roads in most of the north, and just this last year, a lot of the ice roads you couldn't use because of climate change. It's a huge problem with the ice roads and getting fuel to the First Nations, getting food up there. So it's a problem just relying on that. That's a good question. It's also a very hard question because there's a lot of these places are located in ecologically sensitive areas, like the boreal forest of northern Ontario, or that's often been described as the lungs of the earth. It's so important. And so you have to be so careful, and the First Nations know that, and they know they're not going to plow through, otherwise it would have been done earlier. I mean, this has got to be something that everybody wants and that is very thoughtfully considered, because to make the roads in some of the areas too, it's all muskeg and it's muck. You're going to have to drill right down. You're going to disrupt everything. And there's stuff there that it's absolutely gorgeous, and if anyone ever does get the chance to travel there, I've been lucky enough to go up there many times, and I've never seen anything like it. It's like you always have a joke about how,
it's going to take a long time to explain that.
Yeah, okay. But anyway, it's like, I love it up there. I just, as far as the eye can see, there's nothing. There's no development. There's nothing but these gorgeous rivers and streams and the muskeg. It looks like stripes on a tiger's back, as like for hundreds and hundreds of kilometers as far as you can see. Because the planes that go up there, they're the small planes, they're the bush planes, and they only fly like 1,400 feet above. Like, you can't go very high whatsoever. So you get this gorgeous view of everything, and you realize, my God, this is pristine, and it's untouched by machine. There are no hydro poles. There's nothing. Your phone is not going to work out there. You're totally disconnected. And it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Really, it is. And that should be protected. But it's up to the communities. If they can do it in a safe way and they want it, whatever they want.
Are there other questions? I have more if we have time for a few more, though. If you're going to ask more questions. Sure, I've got lots. Well, I will start off as people are thinking questions. What's the reaction been like? Because you were a bit worried too. I mean, it's been in some ways the perfect time for this to come out. Yeah. But has it been overwhelmingly positive? Have you had any negative? What's been?
I've actually been really surprised by how people have felt drawn to the book, and I wasn't sure. It was like really, really funny. A lot of people ask me, "How do you feel? You must be so excited." And I'm like, "No, actually, I don't feel excited at all." I hope that I do bring justice to the kids and the families, and I very much feel that that's the number one. And also to the community. I feel like everyone's got to, I hope that they feel part of the book. And if everyone feels good, then I'm all right. But I'm amazed and so proud that teachers like Lisa and other teachers, it's amazing, like on Twitter or emailing me, just like it's all librarians and teachers. And I think that's just the coolest thing in the world. And professors, like I was just at Queen's. And it's cool too because, you know, it's not like sort of the, other than it, I'm so excited to go to the literary festival there this weekend, but like, you know, it's a groundswell of universities that are also approaching me, like Queen's loved the book and wanted me to go up. The University of Manitoba, the University of British Columbia. So it's not sort of the big authors festival things, but it's the people that are actually going to use the book and love the book, and I think that's really awesome.
You realize how much this isn't in your curriculum. I mean, none of us learned this.
I know.
Until recently, really.
Yeah.
So are there any other questions? If not, Tanya will be obviously here and signing books after, and I think
so she could
and you have a question?
Yeah.
Okay.
First of all, thank you so much for writing this.
Thank you.
The question is, getting through a lot of the stories and sort of the sadness that's going on, what I found true light in the was the amount of support from the communities. I'm surprised by that. You know, that people come from a lot of lines and help them.
So for those who couldn't hear, sorry you couldn't hear it, because it's just saying that he was so struck in the book of how the community, when the rest of society failed, came together. And did that surprise you to learn that? You know, all these people in their vans looking for the kids. Was that a shock?
And sort of a two-part to that, yeah, yes and no. The no part because my mother's family is huge, like, you know, and so, and people, and she's lived in small communities, and everyone knows everyone, and everyone comes to help, and that's an awesome thing. And First Nations families, totally true, and all the different communities that they're near. Everybody, if a child was missing, everybody comes, everyone helps. They fundraise, they make stew, they do everything, and that was the coolest thing when I was standing in the Canadian Red Cross, that was the command center in Thunder Bay for the search for Jordan. I remember being there, and it was so wild because the nations were putting their flags up on the wall. You know, there was Cat Lake First Nation, there was Casa Monica, like everyone was like had their thing, and also then you had all these grannies like Copums in the corner, and they were stirring the moose stew, and people were bringing in fish. Like it was amazing. They were all being fed, and it was felt like, you know, such a sense of community, and that was a beautiful thing.
Last call, not for beer, but for questions. No? Well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming, and thank you, my dear friend Tanya, and thank you for doing the book.
Thank you.